Hey everyone, welcome to the May YPN meeting. It's good to see everyone's names in the participants box, but it's still good to see all of you. I'm glad you came. Well, today we have two guests from the city, Hannah and Morgan. They're going to talk about what's coming up with Plan COS and the future of the city. And are you two ready to go?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll mute myself and you two can take it away.
Great. Thank you. So I'm Hannah Van Nemwegen. I'm one of the planners with the city of Colorado Springs, and my coworker Morgan is also joining us today. So I thought we thought that we would introduce or just talk about some general concepts that have been in the news a lot lately. So I'll dive into Plan COS first, and then we'll hand it over to Morgan to talk about Retool. And then I'll take it back over to talk about ADUs, and then Morgan will close with short-term rentals. And so let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So, like I mentioned, my name's Hannah and Morgan is my coworker. Here is kind of our breakdown and what we're working on now. Like I said, I'm leading accessory dwelling units as well as future neighborhood planning efforts, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And Morgan's leading us with Retool COS, which is the zoning code update, and then also leading us with short-term rentals. So just to dive into Plan COS a little bit, we adopted Plan COS, or City Council adopted Plan COS in early 2019. And we do have a requirement to report out annually on how well we're doing with meeting some of those goals and addressing some of the strategies and utilizing those strategies that are outlined in that plan. So we are currently working on the very first annual report. It is going to Planning Commission this month, and I'll be sure to share it there will be a social media push with it in there once City Council kind of gives it its blessing. But we also are constantly updating our keystone indicators, which are on our website. And so if you don't want to wait for the annual report, but you're just interested on how some of those keystone indicators are moving forward, we are keeping them pretty much up to date as new data is published. So if we go to Plan COS's main page, the second little box is called the Indicators Dashboard. And you can see that some of these are 2018 numbers, but that's because new data hasn't been published yet. But some of these are relatively up to date, like such as October 2019, the number of high priority neighborhood plans that we've done. We also keep track of the number of lane miles per dwelling unit, the citywide net density of new residential development. These are all indicators that help tell us how well we're doing with achieving some of our goals. So those will be constantly updated as new data is published, but the annual report will be kind of a summary of all of these things. So I'm sure everybody's relatively familiar with Plan COS. It is organized around 6 vision themes, that being vibrant neighborhoods, unique places, thriving economy, strong connections, renowned culture, and majestic landscapes. So a lot of our goals fit neatly into one of those categories. And along with those 6 main topic areas, we did identify 6 key initiatives to help achieve the goals that are outlined in Plan COS. So the very first being a complete rewrite of the zoning and subdivision code, which we're calling Retool COS, which Morgan will talk about. And then the second one being an update to the intermodal transportation plan. Our transportation department has started to work on this. I don't think that they've pushed much out to the public just yet, but there is work being done. And that's being called Move COS. We are establishing a neighborhood planning program. That is kind of a future thing. We had started work on it, but as I'm sure you would imagine, neighborhood planning requires a lot of public outreach, a lot of public interaction. And this whole COVID-19 has kind of thrown a wrench into all of that. So we need to take a step back, see how we can virtually or digitally supplement some of those outreach efforts. But we need to have a strong platform to do so, and that's still being developed. So our neighborhood planning program is kind of on a little bit of a pause because of that reason. We also are working on, or we actually just passed the Affordable and Attainable Housing Plan. That's called Home COS. And our Innovation and Sustainability Department is also working on Smart COS, which is the last key initiative for creating a smart cities plan. With that, I think I want to turn it over to Morgan for an update with, or just a presentation on Retool.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. So let's see here. I think, can everybody see a Retool PowerPoint in front of them, hopefully? Awesome. Okay. So as Hannah mentioned, yes, luckily we are coworkers, which is great. Both of us are in the planning department. I am on the land use review side of the house. And one of the latest undertakings that I have is being the project lead for Retool COS. So Plan COS, being our comprehensive plan, established the vision of what we all want to see for the future of Colorado Springs. Retool is essentially what is going to set the teeth to that. So this kicked off in December. We have hired consultants out of Denver, Clary & Associates, to assist in this. Chapter 7 is our current zoning code, and I don't know if anybody is familiar with that, but it does establish all of the land use regulations, dimensional standards, design guidelines for the city, and Retool is working on taking that whole thing, reworking it. So it's, I'll go into why, but just kind of a preface as to what the heck Retool is, because it's, you know, not many people are fully aware of it, which is fine because zoning can be a bit dry. So if everyone is kind of thinking that, I am not offended because I feel that. So the ultimate goal is for this to be referenced as the Unified Development Code, the UDC. This will be where everybody references, everybody being developers, applicants, everything housed in one place for what is required for new development. So again, the project purpose is for us to create a more usable document, referencing back to Plan COS, what those goals and the vision of it is, establishing better design standards and encouraging creative use of land and different properties. And it's also going to restructure what we currently have. And that is not just for applicants, developers, anyone that's referencing Chapter 7. It's also for us, because honestly, it is sometimes a little difficult for staff even to find things, which is a bit of a red flag that, oh my gosh, we need to revise this. So what is Chapter 7? I kind of went over this briefly, but it does set the standards and allowances for what individuals can do with their property. It does establish different design standards, dimensional standards, and this graphic on the screen is showing setbacks, you know, so front, rear, side, building height, lot coverage, all of that is going to be found in Chapter 7. It's also going to define what the uses are that are permitted on properties. So in our homes, we can live there because obviously it's residential, but if we were to set up some sort of brick making factory, that would not be permitted through Chapter 7. So that's where you find those regulations. The project scope, again, this kicked off in December, and I will, after this presentation, this is just the general overview, I'll kind of update you all on where we are now and how you can be involved in this process. So Retool, this chart is very helpful because each side shows what it will focus on and what it will not. Again, kind of went over the dimensional standards, what those uses are, parking requirements, landscaping, including graphics so that it's easier for everybody to utilize it. Now, I do want us to focus on the side where it says what we will not be focusing on. Building and construction codes are managed by Pikes Peak Regional Building Department. So that's a separate enterprise from us. We are not going to get into making any changes in what documents they have on the books now. Sign regulations, we will not be touching that. That will be through a separate process. Parkland and school dedication, also separate process, as goes for impact fees and fiscal analysis. Short-term rentals, obviously I will be talking about that later, and as well as ADUs, which Hannah will cover. The two of us have been working on those ordinances, and so to avoid confusing everything or giving the appearance that, yeah, we worked on it over here, but we're also going to do it with Retool. We didn't want the lines to be blurred and crossed. So those are separate processes from Retool. And wireless communication in small cell facilities, telecom is not included in Retool. That is something that I have been working on separately. I actually went to first reading on Tuesday at City Council and it was passed unanimously. So anything that's being worked on now, again with STRs, ADUs, telecom, that will be wrapped into Retool, but it's not part of the scope for the consultants. Process overview, this shows how everything is going to go down with this. We are currently in section, I suppose it'd be 2A, so we're focusing on the zoning districts and permitted uses right now. City Council has requested that Retool be adopted by April 2021. So we do have an extremely accelerated timeline, but this is how that timeline will go. We have 3 modules. Under number 3, it mentions the consolidated draft. So that's where everything will be housed together. Number 4 is the final draft, and 5 is implementation, again, in April 2021. So the tasks, kickoff meeting, we already had that. That, again, was in December. Orientation, also in December. Stakeholder interviews, also December. We've been having a number of meetings with City Council and City Planning Commission. There is a great deal of public participation opportunities, which again, I will go over. We do have a website and I will show that to you all so you're able to keep track of what's going on. And if you want to be a part of this process, there's an email address that you can just say, hey, please add me to the list and I can get you included on that. The project plan, which is mentioned at the bottom, it was Clarion's assessment of what currently is in Chapter 7 and basically analyzing what conversations they had with various stakeholders, city staff, elected officials, kind of outlining the pathway. This is where we want to go with this, so that has been accomplished, and we are currently on Module 1, which is again the zoning districts and their uses. Opportunities for input, kind of mentioned this already, but there are a number of ways that the public can get involved, which does include you guys. So I would love to have you all involved and hear any feedback that you have. We have a project website, there's an email list, interactive public engagement. So with the first meetings that we had, there was a public survey. With this first module, we really didn't see how it would be beneficial to have a survey, but we will with Module 2 because that will cover dimensional standards and design guidelines. And so a lot of it will be, hey, does seeing a development that looks like this, does this make sense? Does it fit in the context versus, I'm just making this up because I used it earlier, having a brick factory as your next door neighbor, does that make sense? So though we may have more surveys for public participation with Module 2. Stakeholder interviews, again, if there are any questions or comments that you have, this is somewhat of an ongoing point throughout this whole process. Because we have such an accelerated timeline, the review periods are 2 weeks for staff to review, and then our advisory and technical committees to review, and the public review. We're working through this in waves, but that is not to say that once we're done with this, you can't say anything for the life of the project. If we have already passed one of the modules and you say, oh my gosh, this makes absolutely no sense, can I please make a comment? Yes, please make a comment, send it, and we'll get it incorporated. The advisory committee is a group of elected officials and members of the industry, as well as neighborhood representatives. They are reviewing the drafts alongside with us and providing their feedback, just as the public will. Next step, so again, this is the first presentation, so it is somewhat outdated as we continue to move on with this, but we are currently on Module 1, which is again those zoning districts and the proposed uses. Module 2, let me see if there's a, Module 2 will focus on dimensional standards and design requirements. And Module 3 will be administrative processes, which is basically how projects are reviewed. Does it just get done by staff? Does it go to public hearing? And the 4th module, which is really the consolidated draft, will be in December. And then the final will be proposed to City Council at the end of March of next year. Now I want to show you all the website. So hopefully I can still make this whole thing work. Can you see the website that I have pulled up? No, let's see. I'm gonna do new share. Now do you see a website? Are you do? Okay, good. Thank you everybody for nodding your head. So this is the Retool website, and you can find it by going to our city page. We do have a tab underneath planning and development. So housed underneath Plan COS, which is what Hannah just went over, we have Retool. There are some documents here because we had to move nearly everything into a virtual platform. I worked with the communications department to have all of these documents under this tab stay involved, where it's got fast facts and more explanation about what Retool is. You can also access the Module 1 draft here for review. And the email address that I mentioned, if you have any questions or comments, and that does include anything regarding Module 1, please send it to retoolcos@coloradosprings.gov. And I will let you in on a secret. I monitor that email, but I do ask that everybody send it to that email address so that it doesn't get buried into the other emails that are sent to Morgan Hester at Colorado Springs. So in short, Retool COS is revising what we currently have on record, Chapter 7, which is kind of like our department Bible, I suppose. It's everything that mandates land use and zoning for the planning department as well as the city. And I'm the project lead. If you have any questions, again, just reach out. So I will turn it over to Hannah for her to discuss ADUs. You're muted.
Thank you, Morgan.
You're welcome.
So we'll go back to my presentation for ADUs. So I'm sure everybody at this point has heard about accessory dwelling units. I'll dive into the history a little bit more, but we've been working on accessory dwelling units. I should say that I started researching this back in 2016. So this is a long time coming. But just to preface the conversation, I always like to show what an example of an alternative dwelling unit or just a secondary dwelling unit might look like. So that could be a detached cottage in the backyard, maybe it's above a garage, and we are also introducing the idea of an integrated ADU, so something that's attached to the main home. So that could be a home addition, it could be a converted second floor or attic, or it could be a converted basement. So when we talk about these secondary dwelling units, this is what you should visualize. This is kind of what we're talking about. So where ADUs are permitted currently, you can see that there's a large concentration around downtown and even larger around Old Colorado City. These are the properties that are zoned either 2-family or multifamily. So R2, R4, R5, and then also our special use zone districts. As we're kind of going through the retool process, some of these districts may be relabeled as something else, but currently, as the code currently stands, these districts allow accessory dwelling units, and they're currently only allowed as detached units. So that being, again, either a detached cottage or above a garage, something along those lines. Now, where we're proposing to make some changes is into our single family zone districts. And those are kind of highlighted in a little bit of a lentil soup color. R2 and multifamily being highlighted in blue, and then these new districts being illustrated. So in single family, we are proposing that only integrated units be permitted. So everything that's highlighted in that yellowish color is either going to be a home addition, a basement unit, or a attic or second floor type unit. So just to go back into the history, I did start researching this back in 2016 when Plan COS was kind of starting their whole process of writing and researching. And so these kind of overlapped a little bit. However, we didn't get the formal go-ahead to start doing something until May of 2018. So we started researching, or we continued researching, but then we also started having discussions with other cities who maybe had implemented something that we thought was interesting, or we thought that maybe they had similar demographics, and if they had had conversations, just to kind of prepare ourselves for what we might be coming up against, but then also to discuss, well, what worked for you guys and what didn't work? How can we avoid what didn't work, and how can we get ahead of issues, things like that. We did form an ADU steering committee in mid-2018, and that steering committee consisted of practitioners mostly, but we also had a member of city council, a member of planning commission. We had, as far as practitioners go, a couple of general contractors, an architect, and we also had a couple of neighborhood representatives. They were able to, particularly the general contractors and architects, were really able to tell us what doesn't work in the existing code, what creates issues, and how can we fix those through this code update. We also gave a bunch of informational presentations, like to the Historic Preservation Board, the Human Relations Commission, the Committee on Aging, as well as City Council and City Planning Commission. But the City Planning Commission heard our first drafts of ordinances back in March of last year. Those ordinances, I won't sugarcoat it, crashed and burned. They did not go over all that well. While some of the concepts representatives liked, there were some concepts that just were never going to fly. And largely that was proposing detached accessory dwelling units in single family zones. So with these new ordinances, which I'll dive into a little bit further, those have been taken off the table. So we really drafted these ordinances to be a little bit more representative of what City Council had communicated to us, but then also what some of the public had communicated to us. Throughout 2019, we held several work sessions with City Council to kind of nail down what they were hoping to see. And then just a few weeks ago, April 30th, we presented these revised ordinances to City Planning Commission, which were approved unanimously. So public involvement, we've had pretty consistent social media posts to Facebook and Nextdoor, most predominantly. We also held open houses in February of last year to present the old ordinances. But since then, we've had multiple meetings with the Council of Neighbors and Organizations, and also many CONO-sponsored events. We've also held meetings with specific neighborhood groups, such as the Old North End, and continued having presentations with some of our more special topic committees, commissions, boards, things like that. The City Council also held 2 town halls in late 2019 so that the council could have direct interface with the public on accessory dwelling units. So these are the 3 ordinances that are proposed. These are intended to be viewed as a package. However, we decided to separate them out just so that if there was an issue with one ordinance, it wouldn't necessarily hold up the other 2 ordinances if those were supported and good to go. So the first ordinance introduces this idea of accessory family suites. This was not in the old ordinances, and I'll go into exactly what that means, but they're particularly geared towards single family districts. Ordinance 1.2 adjusts definitions in Chapter 7, which then would be rolled over into Retool and the new code. It also adjusts some of the standards for accessory dwelling units. And I should say it adjusts the requirements and the development standards for ADUs in 2-family and multifamily districts. And then the last ordinance being the ADU overlay zone. And the ADU overlay zone is really intended to be used in conjunction with the zoning of a new residential development. So just some highlights. Ordinance 1.1, the accessory family suites. The ordinance establishes a definition for accessory family suites, but most specifically, the definition does not call it a dwelling unit. And in that way, we are limiting the number of individuals who could occupy an accessory family suite that may exist within a primary home to 1 family. So the accessory family suite definitely hits a niche. So one of the issues that we had been seeing is that in our current code, our definition of kitchen has a very strict threshold of it, including a 220 volt outlet gas or propane connection for in the kitchen area for it to be considered a dwelling unit. So if you didn't have that, you didn't technically have an accessory dwelling unit. So we had all these, what we were lovingly calling fake ADUs popping up all over single family districts. So these fake ADUs are now going to be accessory family suites, and we are eliminating that threshold of a 220 volt outlet gas or propane. So now you can have a second kitchen in your home that can be within this family suite, as long as there's still that overall cap of one family on the entire property. And that would be regulated through a recorded and notarized affidavit that then would go or be recorded against a property's title, acknowledging the property owner acknowledging that they know only one family can occupy the entire property. So we are proposing these accessory family suites to be permitted in all zone districts where a single family home is allowed, and that would include PUD zones. We are not proposing an owner occupancy requirement, mostly because right now, single family homes, there is no requirement for the property owner to occupy a single family home now. So because we're not adding any additional individuals, we felt that it was appropriate to not require owner occupancy, because in theory, the number of people living on the property as a whole is not changing. We are requiring an internal connection between the primary living area and this accessory family suite. So that can be a hallway, a stairway. We would allow like a door to be locked, but you do need to have that internal connection point. With accessory family suites, there are no fire rated separation requirements, and they may use the same mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems as the primary home. We would also prohibit subdivision from the main home, prohibit subdivision and separate sale in single family zones, and that would also be regulated through a restricted covenant. Again, that would be recorded and notarized going onto the property's title. We are proposing architectural requirements. Those architectural requirements would largely just ensure that there is compatibility or visual compatibility with a home addition so that it doesn't look like a duplex from the front of the home or something like that. We are also requiring one off-street parking space. So this is kind of what a accessory family suite would look like. In single family zones, again, they're permitted in all zones where a detached single family home is permitted. Only one family can occupy a property that has an accessory family suite, not requiring owner occupancy. For a single family home with an accessory family suite, you have to have 2 total off-street parking stalls. Currently, the code requires 1 off-street parking space for your home, and then with the addition of the second of the accessory family suite, you would need 2 total. And then outlining those architectural requirements, it must be architecturally integrated into the primary structure. You cannot have a detached accessory family suite. The entrance, if you want an exterior entrance, has to be to the side or to the rear of the home. If you have a second floor or an attic family suite, then you can have a stairwell, but it has to be attached to a deck. And so we're trying to avoid that look of a fire escape so that it really does maintain that appearance of a single family home. Again, that must have an internal connection, and you can have a different configuration than what the 3 options that we've shown, but these would probably be the 3 most common. So the second ordinance really dives into adjusting what we currently have. So we'd be adjusting a lot of the definitions that pertain to accessory dwelling units to be more in line with what the International Residential Code uses. At one point, when those definitions were initially written, they aligned with the International Residential going to occupy the ADU, so 2 families total per property. And it would also require 1 off-street parking space. So in single family zones, the primary difference between this and an accessory family suite is, in order to have a true accessory dwelling unit where a second family could occupy that unit, you have to receive approval of a conditional use from the City Planning Commission. That would require public notice at the application submittal as well as to the hearing. It also cannot be subdivided from the main property, and that would be regulated with a restrictive covenant. This is where we would require property owner occupancy. If you had approval of a conditional use to have an accessory dwelling unit in single family zones, we also would require this property owner occupancy. The main goal here is to maintain or lock in buying properties, building these ADUs, and then renting them out to 2 different families. So we are trying to maintain that character of having a property owner living next to you. And so that's where we would come up with, or this is where we came up with the idea of owner occupancy, again, going to requiring the restrictive covenant. So integrated, again, in single family zones, these would only be allowed as integrated. We would not allow detached units. Hold on, sorry. My computer's flipping out a little bit. Okay. We would not allow detached units in single family zones. They would require fire rated separation between the 2 units and also separate mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. In 2-family, multifamily, and commercial zones, the existing restrictions would apply, but ultimately what we're doing is we're relaxing them. We're relaxing a lot. We're allowing a taller building height. We're allowing a smaller lot size. And these were all recommendations that came out of our ADU steering committee. This is largely what an integrated accessory dwelling unit would look like. It looks a lot like the accessory family suite. But again, requiring the conditional use in single family. They're already permitted in 2-family and multifamily as a duplex. So the idea of an integrated accessory dwelling unit doesn't really exist in 2-family and multifamily, because at that point it just becomes a duplex where they're already allowed. You would be allowed to have 2 families on the property. You would be required, if you were the property owner, to occupy the property in single family, but we would not require it for 2-family and multifamily. Still needing 2 off-street parking stalls, and we also have some architectural requirements for these as well. The detached unit, let's see, as far as height maximums go right now, there's just a flat maximum of 25 feet, but with this, with the new code, we would be measuring it based off of roof pitch. So if you had a roof pitch of 612 or steeper, you would be allowed, or sorry, this is actually backwards. So if you had a 612 roof pitch or steeper, you would be allowed to go up to 28 feet. But if you had a roof pitch that was actually more shallow, then the maximum would be 25 feet. We are proposing to reduce the lot size as well. And so that would mimic the minimum lot size for the zone district, which for a single family home. Right now, if you had a single family home with an ADU, you would actually need to have more lot area than what was required by the base zone. So we're proposing to roll that back. Also in the current code, we do require a 20-foot minimum separation between the main unit and the ADU, and we're proposing to strike that requirement. So really all that would apply are fire code requirements. Again, these codes do not override any HOA covenants that may exist in a neighborhood. That's true mostly of most city zoning code regulations. If your HOA is more restrictive, the proposed zoning code wouldn't necessarily override that. So then the last ordinance that we are proposing is something, or that we're calling the accessory dwelling unit overlay. The overlay, The purpose is to provide flexible housing options while ensuring the overall character of a development is consistent with the base zone. And largely, we're envisioning this would be used in conjunction with the zoning of a new residential development. And this is really intended to provide a developer an additional avenue to allowing accessory dwelling units. The code right now, if you wanted to have a single family neighborhood, but then maybe allow these accessory dwelling units, you would need to zone it either PUD or R2, so our 2-family district. But that kind of comes with its own issues. And so with this overlay, you could go with a true single family zone district if that all worked for your development. But then you had this overlay where somebody may be able to have an ADU. We are proposing that the neighborhoods that have an ADU wouldn't necessarily be required to go through the conditional use process, and they wouldn't necessarily be required to have the owner occupy the unit just because it was a part of that base zone. However, if you had a PUD, then you could basically set your own standard. So you could require owner occupancy, or you could require the conditional use process. Basically, the goal of this is just to provide another avenue to accomplish something. So the affidavit and the covenants that I've been talking about, the affidavit is really only required for accessory family suites. It basically is a notarized acknowledgement from the current property owner saying that they're aware that no more than one family can occupy the entire property, and that this would be basically a recorded warning to future property owners that this is a government or a local zoning regulation that they would also need to adhere to. The covenant prohibiting subdivision and separate sale would apply to accessory family suites, and it would apply to integrated accessory dwelling units in single family districts. So this is a notarized promise to not sell the family suite or the ADU separately from the principal dwelling unit, or to subdivide it from the main structure. It is also recorded and goes onto the property's title as a warning to future property owners, but then the requirement to adhere to it also transfers to future property owners. Our city attorney's office has been working with us to craft this language and believes that what we have drafted and is in the council documents would work. The last covenant is for the property owner occupancy. This would be required for an integrated accessory dwelling unit in single family if they got approval of the conditional use. We are proposing a waiver to the owner occupancy. We all know that the world is a little weird right now, and these circumstances can pop up. And so we are proposing a potential waiver process for up to 2 years for certain hardships. So that would include if you had an unexpected economic hardship, if the property is actively marketed for sale, and then also if there's some type of temporary relocation because of employment. So if you were active duty, then you wouldn't necessarily, or you would be eligible for this owner occupancy waiver. Or if you had some type of medical treatment that required you to travel to receive those services, you would be eligible for this. Or if there's a divorce or a legal separation or a death of a property owner or just something like that, you would have this option to get a waiver. We would also consider an additional 1-year extension to the original waiver. So for a potential of 3 total years that you would be allowed to not live in your home if you had this accessory dwelling unit. People always bring up tiny homes, so I thought that I would just dive into that real quick. Alternative construction types. So if you have a recreational vehicle, tiny home, manufactured home, modular home, or a mobile home, any permanent structure that is attached to a foundation and connected to metered utility services may be used as an ADU. And that can include a quote unquote tiny home as long as they're not on their wheels. Tiny homes that are on wheels are considered recreational vehicles. An RV that is outside of a designated campground or mobile home park cannot be used as a dwelling unit. And a permanent RV is only allowed within those designated mobile home parks. So just a quick summary, because that's a lot of information and several years worth of work that I just kind of summarized in just a few minutes. But in two-family and multifamily zones, not a whole lot is changing, just a lot of flexibility. We're reducing some standards just to make it a little easier for somebody to build an accessory dwelling unit. In single-family zones, that's where you're seeing some changes. However, with this accessory family suite option, in actuality, not all that much is changing. What a lot of people don't realize is that these fake ADUs are being permitted all the time. And so these accessory family suites are a way to make them legal, but then also city planning doesn't personally care if you have a second kitchen that has a 110 outlet versus a 220 outlet. And so what we're hoping to do is have this accessory family suite option where we can get other things to make them more beneficial, such as requiring one off-street parking space, capping them at one family per property with this notarized affidavit. Let's see, and then moving on to accessory dwelling units, if you wanted to eventually step that up, where you could have a second family, you have to get approval of a conditional use through City Planning Commission. The owner has to occupy the property or get a waiver. We do require fire rated separation between those units, also requiring one parking space. And both of these types of units, the family suite and the ADU, can only exist as an integrated option. There is no detached option for either the accessory family suite or the true ADU. And then with that, I think I'll turn it over to Morgan for short-term rentals.
Hannah, before we turn it over to Morgan, we've got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
So the first one is, when will accessory family units be an approved use?
Sure. So just a little bit of a timeline moving forward. We did go to Planning Commission. They make a recommendation to City Council. So Planning Commission just happened a couple of weeks ago. So we are proposing to take them forward to the May 22nd council work session. So because that Monday is a holiday, we have to go to the Friday before. So May 22nd will be work session. Then we go to first reading, and that'll be the first meeting in June, which I think is June 9th. Don't quote me, but I think that's when it is. Yeah. And then we have to go to second reading. So we have to do 2 readings at council. And so the second reading would be the second one in June. And that's our proposed timeline. Generally speaking, ordinances don't go into effect until 10 days after approval. So 10 days after the second reading is when they will be in effect and allowed.
Okay. And then how exactly would they define single family? So in the phrase, property will be still be occupied by one single family. So does that include grandparents? Can I rent it out to my friend the same as I would rent out a room to a roommate?
That's a great question. So in the zoning code, we actually define what a family is. And that definition consists of any number of individuals who are actually related by blood or marriage, as long as you're not meeting any life safety issues. And then also it includes up to 5 unrelated individuals. So if you had yourself as one person, you could have 4 roommates for a total of 5 unrelated people. If you had yourself, your husband, and a child, then you could have 2 roommates that were unrelated to you for a total of 5. If the entire household were all related individuals, as in by blood or marriage, you can have any number. So one family being, if you're not all related, 5 is the total. If you are related, make sure you're not violating fire code. So we are proposing to change that. That definition has existed in the city code since 1973. And so it's been around for a while and is currently applicable. If you had a single family home now, you could have up to 5 unrelated people. So we are not proposing to change that. That currently exists.
Okay, thank you. And Morgan, you are up.
All right. So let's move to short-term rentals. Okay, can everybody see this? Excellent. All right, short-term rental program. So here, this is some program history. I will say that it is not as extensive as all of the work that Hannah has done with ADUs, but STRs has done a lot. So this program was initially adopted last year in January. Prior to that, we did not have any regulations in place. And they're similar to ADUs. A lot of research was put into it, what other municipalities within Colorado, as well as the nation, what they were doing. So with that first ordinance, that's where all of that came from. After that, City Council wanted some updates on how the program was going. And looking back at all the meetings that I went to public hearing 15 times between June and December of last year. So we can just pause on that thought. But it started off as, we want updates, what's the data, who's renting out their properties, and then it evolved into, okay, we want to have some amendments to these existing ordinances. So after what came from those 15 meetings that I went to with council and CPC, the first ordinance amendment, and I'll go over what this language entails, but the first was in July, and that was focused on sales tax. The second was in November, and that was for maximum occupancy of these dwelling units. And December was really the bulk of changes that were proposed to non-owner occupied STR properties. And I do want to note that, as with Retool and Plan COS, we also have a website that is specific to short-term rentals. So if anybody ever wants to reference those ordinances, we do have them available on our website under the Ordinance tab. And I can show you that website after this presentation. So again, we had 3 amendments that came out of this last year. The first was sales tax. And sales tax was largely covered in a different section of the code, but the council wanted to ensure that everything was incorporated into Chapter 7, which is again the zoning code. So the highlighted section, or I should say bolded section of this sentence, is what was included as new language. The council wanted to ensure that any operators of short-term rentals were completely up to date with their sales tax. So a requirement of these permits is that the operator must obtain a sales tax license with the city. I do want to note that we do not require a state sales tax license, but if somebody gets it, that's awesome. But we don't need to see that documentation. The city sales tax office is also completely separate from the planning department. And I say that because we do tend to get some pretty in-depth questions regarding sales tax. I did not go to school for accounting, so I'm not able to help. And I just wanted to make this point. So if you do get any questions about it, please direct your clients to the sales tax office separately. So going back to what this ordinance entailed, it was just to ensure that anybody either had their sales tax and it was active, or if they didn't, that they were paying those taxes to the city prior to getting their STR permit. Occupancy was widely discussed as well. So Hannah was talking about the definition of a family. Prior to this ordinance amendment, that is the way that we were managing these STRs. Based on a number of complaints that were received, that were sent to not just the planning department, but also city council, with the number of people that were utilizing these properties, this use, that, with the number of, not complaints, but just contact that had been made from the public regarding this, the decision was made to incorporate a change very strictly defining what those occupancy limitations for STRs are. The way that this section reads is that, I get that everyone can read it, but I hate reading off of sites, so I'll just kind of say it in my own words, that basically you can have 2 occupants per a bedroom plus an additional 2 people. So if you have 3 bedrooms on site, you could have 6 people plus 2, which would be like a bonus room. They could sleep in the basement, a non-conforming bedroom, to total to 8 people. The maximum per dwelling unit would be 15 occupants. And the reason for that is because 16 would fall into the definition of a hotel. And because the intent of STRs is to be more of a residential type use, we wanted the separation there. So that's where the 15 occupants comes into play. I did make a note at the bottom of this that we have updated, it's kind of an evolving process based on these ordinance amendments. Luckily, we haven't had to make any changes for a few months, but the way that the application reads now, anybody must provide the number of bedrooms on that application so that we have it on record. They also show that in their listings. Okay, so the bulk of what was changed, this came into effect in December. There was a lot of discussion with the council of the owner-occupied versus non-owner-occupied short-term rental properties. Owner-occupied obviously means that the owner is there, but how, what do they need to abide by? Is that the definition of, however many days are in a year, or is it 2 days a year, 12 days, so it got to be this huge discussion. What was settled upon is 185 days each year. So the way that we got to that was some people, of course, living in Colorado, it snows a lot, and there are people that want to get away from said snow. So if they own a home here and then go to Arizona during the winter, that's fine, but they need to be in their home here for 185 days. So we've included that definition into the section of short-term rentals within Chapter 7. So building upon that, what was established per the request by City Council was to essentially, let me back up. We didn't have a density cap for these applications. So whenever they were coming in, basically, if they complied with everything in the ordinance and they filled out their application, there was no reason for us to deny. So if anybody has ever wondered, have you ever denied one? No, we hadn't denied any. Because again, as long as everybody was in compliance with the ordinance, then they were good to go. What has essentially been established through these ordinance amendments, again, per the direction of City Council, the focus is on non-owner occupied properties. Now that, if there is a limitation on those, it essentially is establishing a permit cap in a sense, especially because there have been quantifiable language put into these ordinances. So any and I will say that this ordinance went into effect on December 26th of last year. So any properties that had been approved prior to did not fall under the purview of this new ordinance. They're good to go as long as they remain compliant, update their permit prior to the expiration date. So any new application that came in after December 26th had to comply with this. This is a bit more wordy, so I, in red, have really the bulk of what this is. Non-owner occupied STRs cannot be within 500 feet of another non-owner occupied STR. And we do a buffer. So it would be, you have a dot and circles. If there's ever a question of this, please contact city staff prior to leading a client to submitting the permit and paying for it. Yes, there are checks that can be done, but we really need to keep this as a staff review to ensure that we're not having to issue refunds if there was maybe something was missed, because we do run the report for however many STRs there are within the buffer. So please send that to staff, and I'll let you know what that contact information is at the end of this presentation. And similar to the ADU ordinance, we adopted a chunk of that because there are situations that come up where somebody may be called to serve the country. And so we've incorporated language that if somebody is active military and they have to leave their property, they have up to a year where they can request a waiver. We have not had any of those requests come in, but in the event that it does happen, we have language available for that. And another piece of this is, again, any properties that had been approved prior to December 26th, good to go, but anything after that would have to comply with this. So for single family zoning districts, which includes those that are zoned R, R16, R19, or a PUD that specifically states that it's a single family development, non-owner occupied STRs are no longer permitted. So if somebody were to submit an application, they didn't live on the property, it would be denied. And again, there's the clause in there that if they are active military and they're called up, then they do have the option for a 1-year waiver. The application requirements are available on the website, but I did just want to put this on here because after those ordinances were adopted, we had to incorporate some changes. So in order to verify that the properties are non-owner occupied versus owner occupied, number 2, where it's been bolded, we do require that 2 documents are submitted with the application to prove what the primary residence is. And there are a number of documents that could be submitted. And basically, if there's a question, I would say that just bug staff about it. Typically, what has been accepted is school registration information, a driver's license. That doesn't, if it's not just that sticker, because you can easily just get that online saying, oh yeah, I moved. The conversation needs to be had with staff so that it's a valid proof of residency. Number 4 has also been bolded. This is a new addition. We require for both owner-occupied and non-owner occupied properties that a signed and notarized affidavit is submitted with the application, again, verifying that it's either non or owner-occupied. At the bottom of the screen, there has been, I've also bolded that if there's additional information that's needed, staff may request it of the applicant. And I will say that if, whenever those applications are submitted, staff does require that proof of listing be provided. So whenever somebody is utilizing Airbnb, VRBO, many of those other platforms, they are providing the host with their own insurance. So a lot of the things that are on here are already met through that process, which is separate and apart from us, but we do need to have proof that they have that listing. And once we assign the permit number to them, that number needs to be included in all marketing materials. I mentioned that there's an STR website, which I will show you at the end of this presentation. And basically it's a catch-all for this program. Of course, the FAQ section is ever evolving and it's quite long. So we're working with communications on how to create subsections so everything is housed a little more orderly, I suppose. All of the documents that are needed to be downloaded for STRs are available online. And this is the email address if there are any questions or if there is a complete application that needs to be sent in. Please email it to shorttermrentals@coloradosprings.gov. Payment can be made over the phone with the phone number that is listed there as well. This is the website, but I am going to show you like the live. So again, it shows how to apply and those documents are downloadable. Something that has been pretty helpful for people, because of course we have those that are in support of the program and those that are in opposition of the program. City Council really liked seeing these heat maps. So each month, staff puts together a heat map of what permits have been approved within those 28 to 31 days. And it shows where the majority of the permits are located within the city. We also have a heat map that shows all of the permits that have been approved. And this is a little out of date, obviously, because we're into May at this point. But this is what those heat maps look like. So they're downloadable through the website. Again, they're updated monthly, and 2 maps are focused on each month. So it's what permits were approved for that month itself, as well as updating the ever-evolving map showing all of those permits that have been approved. So some key things to remember. Again, send any questions to the short-term rentals email address. And this goes for any new permit, if there's a renewal, questions about the 500-foot buffer. Permits are non-transferable. So if I own a home and I have an STR permit and I'm selling it, the new owner cannot take over my STR permit. They would have to submit for their own. I mentioned that any of the permit information, which is specific to that permit number, must be included in all publications for marketing materials. And that's largely the listing on Airbnb, whatever platform the host is utilizing. Renewals do require a new application, as we've had some information change in December. And there are some properties that may need additional applications or go through additional processes, such as a legal non-conforming property. And an example of that would be, we have one STR permit, well, there's actually 3 STR permits for property that is on Waiver. The property is zoned single family, so it's R1 6000, but it's been utilized as a property with the primary home and 2 carriage houses since I think it was 1911. Well, just at first blush, we would not be able to approve 3 applications on a property that only permits 1 dwelling unit. So that applicant had to go through pulling documents to show, hey, since this property was developed, this is how it was utilized with the main structure and the 2 carriage homes in the back. So with that, the documentation, we were able to approve the 3 permits on site. Okay, so I'm going to take you to the website, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember how I did this first time, so let's just see what happens. Can everybody see a website? Awesome, I did it this time. So this is the short-term rental website. And again, it's housed under planning and development. So if you look through this sidebar, you will be able to find it. So short-term rentals, all the information is here. Again, those documents are downloadable. The FAQ section, so I'm not gonna stick to it so you read everything, but I'm just gonna scroll through to show that we've had a lot of frequently asked questions, and we are working on combining them more so it's easier to read through them. Other considerations, a lot of it is what I had just mentioned. We also have this ordinance tab. You're able to download any of those documents for reference. And contact, again, if you could send any questions or comments, new permits, renewals to the short-term rentals website. All right, and that is that.
All right, so we've got 2 questions here. So Hannah mentioned social media. So is there a way that you can share those social media groups or pages so that they can follow for updates?
Sure. So most of the, or I would say all of the social media that we're utilizing is the Colorado Springs City websites, or pages, I should say. So Facebook is just City of Colorado Springs government. Nextdoor, I think, has some level of permission where they can directly push information to neighborhoods. And I believe that the city also has a Twitter account, although I don't know what the handle is. I'll have to get that to you. But we've just been using the main city social media accounts.
Okay, and then also, are these slides, can they be made available?
Okay. Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Okay, perfect. All right, and that is it for our questions.
Great. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to
Yes, perfect. Perfect. So I'll send you over that link so that you can at least pay the project, and then I'll send you over like a, you know, draft has been approved and what's next and all that good stuff. And then as soon as you pay your deposit.
Ooh, okay. Sorry about that. All right, so thank you, ladies, so much. Daniel, do you have any announcements for the end?
Well, I do actually have an announcement.
No, not yet. All right, perfect.
Okay. Well, I've just been made aware that YPN at the state level is going to be having a kind of online convention thing, including a panel. And they would like a couple of questions from each YPN to give to their panelists. And I'll put a post in the Facebook room with the information I've got and for you to submit questions to that panel, and don't have to have them to them before the 27th. So that's Wednesday in 2 weeks. So there's not a rush. Take your time, think up some good ones, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so thank you everyone for attending. I know the time was a little wonky and I'm still learning the Zoom, so hopefully you can forgive the hiccups. But the next YPN meeting will be at normal time, 3 p.m. And we are having Mariana Wagner, who a lot of you guys know. She is also an ethics instructor for PPAR, and she is also one of the volunteers that works on the Ethics and Professional Standards Committee for PPAR. And so she is going to be talking about common violations of the Code of Ethics on social media. So a lot of realtors don't know that their social media also falls under the Code of Ethics. So she's going to be talking about that and answering questions. So does anybody have anything else? All good? All right. Thank you so much, Hannah and Morgan, for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
This has been recorded, so I will make sure that that recording is available. And then if the ladies could also email me their slides, I will get those and I will post those into the Facebook group as well. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you.
Bye.